Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight's topic is a very important one, and it's basically going to revolve around a question a lot of people ask. You know, we've been talking a lot about the Oral Torah and what it's comprised of, how it was assembled, why it was assembled, we're going to talk about as well. And last week, for example, we spoke about 9 different reasons why the Oral Torah was oral and not written down. Previous week we spoke about what the Oral Torah is comprised of, what's it made out of, what the interrelationship between written Torah and Oral Torah is. And tonight's topic is the question of we have a gap. We have a gap between when Moses gave us the Torah, both written and oral, till when the Oral Torah was finally committed to paper, was written down in its final format. And then we have this 1,500-year gap where the transmission of the entire body of Oral Torah had to be done orally, had to be done without any formalized writing down of this information. Now, the Oral Torah is an enormous body of information, so much so that the Mishnah comprises 63 books. The Talmud comprises 39 or 37, depends on how you count. Maimonides, in his Halacha, comprises 14 books. In the newest edition of the Halacha of the Tur, we have 22 books. There's an enormous amount of information, and we claim that the same Torah that we have today that is in our Oral Torah, which is written down now, is the same Torah, Oral Torah, that the Almighty gave Moses at Mount Sinai. Moses gave the Jewish people. So the question that we have to that we want to ask is what was the process of transmitting of the Oral Torah from the times of Moses until the time it was written down? And people commonly ask, like, Rabbi, did you ever play the broken telephone game? So you play broken telephone, and you have a simple message, you transmit it orally, right? And it goes around the room, and from one thing, you say, green ice cream, and before you know it, you have some entirely different message. So the question is, how does the Oral Torah not follow that same logic? We have information, Moshe is giving the Jewish people, he is transmitting the information, they hear it, they give it over to the next generation, and before you know it, it's an entirely different message. That's the question. And of course, we have other examples of this idea. We have stories that get embellished, over history, lore and tradition and folklore and legends and these things. They start off as something and then they develop into something entirely different. Who's to say that the Oral Torah that we have today is the same Oral Torah that the Almighty gave Moshe at Mount Sinai? Now, importantly, if the Oral Torah that we have today is not the same, we have a lot of problems. Because remember, it's one of the principles of our faith. One of the 13 principles of our faith is that the Torah that we have today is the same Torah that the Almighty gave Moses at Mount Sinai. Same written Torah, same oral Torah, no differences, no discrepancies. So that's a principle of our faith. Is this something that we're relying on faith alone? Is this something that it's this dogmatic policy that we just accept with no questions asked? This is the way it is, this is the way it was, even though maybe it's a little bit illogical to assume that this could be done so perfectly for such a long time. So that's the question. So I want to kind of address this from multiple different angles, because I believe that when we analyze the issue critically, we'll actually find that not only was it possible for it to have been preserved in its accuracy for so long, but indeed it was likely. And indeed, the odds of it going awry, the odds of it going in different directions than the way it was intended are more reasonable than it being preserved accurately. Okay, so let's start from the bottom up. Firstly, like we said last week, the Oral Torah was not written down in a final canon. This is a critical point. When Rabbi Judah the Prince, in the 2nd century of the Common Era, wrote down the Mishnah, so he wrote down oral law. But that was not the first time the oral law was committed to paper. The innovation of Rabbi Judah the Prince was not to write down oral law, rather to write down a finalized, codified, canonized, right, final version of Mishnah of Jewish law. Indeed, in every preceding generation, starting from Moses, everyone took notes. And everyone used their notes and shared their notes and copied their notes and perfected their notes. And there was notes everywhere. Every leader, every teacher, every scholar, every parent, everyone kept notes for themselves. Oral Torah was everywhere in written form. The only thing that it was not was in a finalized version. So, in fact, Maimonides describes how Rabbi Judah the Prince would actually collect a lot of these existing works and perfect and kind of assume uniformity with all the existing written documentations and oral traditions. So that's the first thing. So kind of the question's a little bit mitigated when we actually realize that the Oral Torah, indeed, maybe it wasn't finalized in a finalized version, but it was still written down in some form or another. It wasn't just entirely oral. That's an important point number one before we get into the meat and potatoes of the issue. Point number two is that it's really not so long. So 1,500 years sounds like a lot of time, but if you actually look at the generations, if you look from Moses to Joshua, right, generation of generation, the actual list of generations is only 30. So it's almost as if you have to find a way to get 30 leaders of people to not make mistakes in transmission. So means we think about it in terms of hundreds of years and who knows, maybe there's thousands of people. Really, Maimonides delineates 30, I think it's 31 people that the transmission of Torah flowed through them. And these are people of tremendous genius, tremendous dedication to cause, tremendous commitment to the Jewish people and the preservation of Torah. And if you think about it in those terms, it's not so long, it's not so many people, and if you have people dedicated to get it right, you'll find a way. So much so, like if I told the people in the room, we'll play a game of broken telephone, but the goal is not to say the message as quickly and as slurred as possible, rather to say clearly and coherently, right? Me to you and you to them, right? And it's important. And if we don't get it right, someone gets shot. Imagine if I said that. I'm going to say a message to Allison, and we'll go around the room. But if we don't get it perfectly, then one of us is going to be shot. Theoretically, right? Just play along with me. Do you think that we could get it accurately? I think so, right? What if there was 100 people in the room? No. And if it's a message of 5 words, 100 people in the room, or else one of us gets shot. Yeah, like it's not so hard. It means we kind of assume that the transmission was harried. Yeah, you have to give over some sort of message. Let's make sure we're not making mistakes. But the Torah is the lifeblood of the Jewish people. If we get disassociated from Torah, we're disassociated from our destiny, from our mission, from our heritage.
How did you get to 30 people?
Well, Maimonides makes a list. It's these are names of people that we know. It goes from Joshua all the way to King David to Solomon, the leaders of the people throughout every generation, all the way to Ezra to Rabbi Akiva.
But all those leaders had to talk to other people.
That's true. But assuming that if there's one guy who has a mistake in his transmission, that doesn't imperil the Torah, as a whole. If the leadership, if the Sanhedrin, we'll learn about the Sanhedrin in a little bit, but if it goes awry at the head, at the epicenter of the transmission process, we're in much bigger trouble. That's the point. Of course, it's possible to make a mistake. That happens all the time. But a mistake is not necessarily going to perpetuate, but it will if the mistake is in the leaders of the people. Okay, so actually it was interesting. There was a rabbi who lives in Israel who spent a lot of time trying to researching this thing, and he took a bunch of kids, 30 kids, and he promised each one of them that if they have a message that they pass around accurately, he'll give each one of them $50. And you know what? Lo and behold, right? The magic worked. He was able to buck the trend of the broken telephone rule, right? Because if every kid is committed to know that they have to get their message right, and it's transmitted in a way that the transmitter and the receptor is committed to understanding it, well, it'll work. So the comparison is not a very good comparison. But I want to kind of go through a little bit of how this was done. We think about this. We have, of course, there's the leaders, but what about the people? How was oral Torah taught? Written Torah, it's simple. When you're bar mitzvah, when you're in first grade, you get a book, written Torah, and you have it, and it's yours, and you're good to go. What about oral Torah? How was that taught? How did Moshe teach the oral Torah to the Jewish people? So the Talmud tells us in the book of Eruvin, this is on page 54, and ask the question. The rabbis asked, how did Moshe teach the oral Torah? So Moshe got it from God. Moshe is a prophet with direct communication from God. He studied it from God, and then Aaron came in, and Moshe taught it to Aaron. So any given law, Moshe, like for example, the law that the Rambam gives when he describes this is the law of a sukkah. We know he's supposed to sit in a sukkah, but what does a sukkah look like? What's it comprised of? How many walls does it need to have? How tall? How small? Right? What is the schach made out of? All those critical questions are all part of the oral Torah. The Almighty teaches it to Moshe. Right? Moshe memorizes it. Aaron, who is the next in line, the vice leader of the Jewish people, he comes into the room, and Moshe teaches it to him, all the details. When he finishes teaching, Aaron sits to his right, and then the sons of Aaron come in. The sons of Aaron come in, and Moshe teaches it again. So now, Moshe teaches it once just to Aaron, and then once again to Aaron, who's sitting on his right, and Aaron's kids, who are sitting to his left. And then a third time, Moshe teaches to the elders of the people. And lastly, Moshe teaches it a fourth time to the entire assembly of the Jewish people. Thus, Moshe taught it 4 times, once just to Aaron, and then once to Aaron's kids, and once to the leaders of the people, and then once finally to everyone. And then Moshe left, and then Aaron taught to everyone, and then Aaron left, and then Aaron's kids taught to everyone. And then Aaron's kids left, and then the elders taught it to everyone. So in essence, everyone ended up hearing it a minimum of 4 times. That was the process. What happened once they finished a given law? So the Rambam continues here. Afterwards, even though they finished studying it, right? If they had the official 4 times, everyone studied a minimum of 4 times, they would study amongst each other. In essence, the experience at Sinai was very similar to the experience of like studying for your exams. Everyone sits together, so you maybe have someone who's going to lead the study, and then you learn from different personalities. Everyone has their kind of the right flavor. But afterwards, everyone gets together and asks each other questions and further clarifies and analyzes and reviews again and again. And that would be the process that was employed by every single mitzvah. Moshe learns it from God. He teaches it to Aaron. He teaches to Aaron's kids, to the elders, finally to everyone. Aaron teaches, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
And that's not written down after they taught it to them.
So maybe everyone kept notes for themselves. The Rambam says everyone kept notes for themselves, but those were not finalized. Those were all. And last week, by the way, we talked about why, like what was the need for maintaining this oral, this dualistic approach of on oral Torah that works together with a written Torah. Why it has to be like that? We gave 9 different reasons. There's a benefit of having an oral Torah and a written Torah working together. That provides greater clarity. It provides assurances that it won't be forgotten, etc. Okay, so that's how Moshe taught the Torah to the Jewish people. So it's not like some message that you clandestinely share in some secret society. That's how we assume you're transmitting some sort of idea. It's the what are those societies called where they get together and the Masons they gather in some dark corner where they share some secrets. That's not the way it is. It's Torah taught publicly, and Torah taught with the intention of it being understood by everyone involved.
How long did it take for Moshe to teach all of it?
40 years. For the whole 40 years.
40 years?
Oh yeah. And the Torah describes it. The Torah gives highlights every time. Moshe taught the Jewish people. What did he teach the Jewish people? He didn't give them any documents till all the way at the end. This is what the Torah was. The whole story of the Torah, from the middle of Exodus all the way to the end, all we have is Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, the Ma'is Sport to Moshe, teach the Jewish people as follows. How was this done? This is how it was done. Okay, so what about post Moshe? What happens then? So Moshe dies. Joshua's the leader. Joshua dies. He's replaced. And they're replaced. There's 16 judges, and then prophets, and then king. All these leaders of the Jewish people. How was the Torah transmitted after Moshe dies? So the Talmud tells us it's the same way. There were teachers and there were students, and every teacher had to teach a minimum of 4 times. And by the way, if you look at any standard edition of the Talmud, you'll notice that the top lines that correspond to Rashi and Tosfos, there's always 4 lines, always in every page. The books, like if you look at every 2 pages of Talmud is set up differently, but the top is always the same. There's always 4 lines, and that's a remembrance that we have to. If you want to study anything, you have to do it a minimum of 4 times. In fact, I saw today while researching this that the Maharsha says something very interesting. He says the first 3 times you study anything, that is in the realm of Shelo Lishma. That is when you study Torah, not for its sake. You study because you want people to think you're cool, people to think you're wise, people to think you're dedicated, all the different reasons in the world besides for the study of Torah itself. The 4th time you study, that's Lishma. I don't know where he gets it from. It's an interesting idea, that this idea of studying it 4 times, it's been established all the way since Moses, and it's still relevant to us today. You want to do anything, you want to remember something, you study it 4 times. 4 times, then you have a chance of...
Who is it that said that?
The Maharsha, one of the commentaries in the back of the Talmud. Okay, so that's... the Talmud tells us that even in modern times, anytime you teach, you have to repeat it a minimum of 4 times. You have to repeat it a minimum of 4 times. 4 times, 4 times. Anything you teach, 4 times.
Well, you better start over.
That's why I record them, so people can just play them 4 times. Now, what if you teach someone, you teach them 4 times, and then they don't get it? What then?
Okay, but then.
4 more times.
So the Talmud goes on to say, if the guy doesn't get it, you have to keep on teaching them until they understand it. And not only that, until it becomes absolutely abundantly clear. And we'll see a little bit later that the relationship that we have with Torah today is vastly different than the way it was in the times of the Oral Torah in its purity. When the Oral Torah was taught in its purity, people had a tenacious relationship with Torah. They were obsessed with it. This was their life's purpose. This was their mission. This was what their life was about. This preservation and study of Torah. Maimonides writes. Maimonides, he's the rational one, right? What does he write? Everyone needs to study Torah. Well, how much time should you dedicate to study Torah? Right? Maimonides was famous for writing that we can't say I'll study Torah and let other people worry about how am I going to feed my kids. He wasn't into the whole kollel phenomenon. You got to work. Well, you have 12 hours. You work for 3 hours. And you study for 9. So Maimonides is a little bit of a glimpse, a little bit of a window, a little bit of an insight into what the traditional Jewish attitude towards Torah study and scholarship is. It was literally your life's mission, your life's goal. This is our life. We should study Torah day and night. This is what the people were like. So the 4 was the minimum. You don't get it with 4. You go as many times as needed. And not only that, but Rabbi Kiva goes on to say that you have to make it so clear, not just that they understand it, but that it resonates within the student. It has to kind of, has to impact the student from within. And only then do you fulfill your duty as a teacher. And I think, if we kind of reformulate the way we look at the teaching and the study of Torah to classical standards, where this is what kids did, this is what the aspirations of the young, this is what parents hope that their children would be great Torah scholars. But even at a minimum, today the minimum is you have a bar mitzvah and you fumble your way through the hieroglyphics, which is Hebrew. That's the minimum today. The minimum in times past, when the Oral Torah was oral, was 14 years of dedication, 12 hours a day. That was the minimum. Like that was, that's you're doing your bar mitzvah, you're getting your confirmation. That's what it was. With those standards, could you imagine trying to transmit the Torah accurately? I think so. And there's more. There's an emotional story the Talmud tells of one of the rabbis. His name was Rabbi Preda. And he had a student who was slow. How slow? He would have to teach him every halacha, every oral Torah, explain it to him 400 times. And every day, could you imagine? That's what they call it in Israel, they call it a nudnik. Rabbi, I don't get it. Can you say it again? And he goes, again. Again and again and again. 400 times, finally he got it. So one day, listen to this story. It's an emotional story. One day, the rabbi's teaching them, and there are 252 lessons in. You just got 150 more to go. And someone comes in and tells the rabbi, we have to take care of something important. He tells him, I'm busy. I'll get to you when I'm done. The guy's there outside there, waiting his turn. Finally, they finish the required 400 repetitions of the law, and the guy says, I don't get it. It's like, what? I did 400 times. Why don't you get it? Why is today different than every other day? So the slow student explains, he says that ever since this guy came in, I've been distracted. Because he's there, he's pacing, he's waiting for you to finish. I'm worried, are you going to leave? Are you going to bounce out in the middle? I was so worried, I couldn't even concentrate. So the teacher tells him, okay, we're going to do this all over again, and I'm assuring you that I'm not leaving before we do this another 400 times. And indeed, that's what they did. They sat there another 400 times. 800, can you imagine 800 times teaching the same thing to a student? I can't either, right? Of course not, But that's what he did, 800 times. And finally, after 800 times, he got it. And you know what happened after he got it? The Talmud tells a tremendous... After this is once again from the book of Eruvin 54b. After they finished, there was a bat kol. A bat kol is a minor level of prophecy. And the bat kol announces is that Rabbi Preda, because of your commitment to teaching the slow student 800 times, I'll give you two options. Either you merit to live for 400 years, you'll live a really long time, or you will assure that everyone in your generation will have a portion of the world to come. So he opted for the latter, and the Almighty said, you opted for the latter, I'll give you both. Because you were dedicated to other people, you'll get both. So this story is told right after we're told about the dedication that Moshe, the 4 times that Moshe had, and then the unlimited amount of times that all Jewish teachers are tasked with teaching from thenceforth. And I think in light of these standards, what does it say, about the student? Can you imagine the student? The student, his life is getting the Torah study. It doesn't matter if it takes him. Can you imagine? Hundreds of times. After 300 times, I would give up. Anyway, who wouldn't give up? Right? But if this is all you cared about in life, to get clarity in Torah, in oral Torah, well, then it doesn't matter how many times it takes. You're committed. And that's from the teacher, from the student side. From the teacher side, you know that your responsibility in life as a teacher of Torah and the Jewish people is to ensure that you teach your students, as many students, as well as you possibly can. The student is there, you don't stop teaching. I did my due. The bell rung, right? Time's up, right? I put in my 9 to 5. No, it's not a 9 to 5. I'm not trying to fulfill your obligation. You are committed to a national mission of teaching Torah. If that's what your life is about, then you'll do it 400 times, you'll do it 800 times. But I think when we recognize what things were like, what the standards were, what were just the basic mores, what the basic attitudes that those generations had towards Torah study, it makes it a little bit more palatable, a little bit more feasible that all of oral Torah can be conveyed without any mistakes, or at least any mistakes in the central transmission. Is it possible that one guy taught his kids something wrong? Of course. But one guy making a mistake off to the side, so to speak, of the central transmission of Torah, that doesn't affect the Torah itself. Well, what about us? Are we obligated to know Torah as well? How many of us can name the 54 sections of the Torah, just the names? Or how many of the books of Talmud, just the names of the books of Talmud, can we name by heart?
Well, we haven't had 400 instructions, so
Maybe it's say it's my fault. But the point is that collectively, as a nation, and maybe this is partly due, I would say it's due because now we have a crutch because Oral Torah is written down. So it's not as life or death whether or not we ensure that the Jewish nation will continue. Because remember, if Oral Torah ceases, our nation is done. We're over. That's it. It's over. It was nice. It was a nice experiment, and we failed. But now we have a crutch. We can fall back. The Oral Torah is written down and won't be forgotten. But that kind of makes us a little bit more lax. Maybe we could add this to last week's discussion. That maybe is a 10th reason why the Oral Torah has to be oral, because that puts the onus on the nation to be dedicated to Torah, because the stakes are so high. And if it's written down, well, we could let someone else take care of it, or worst comes to worst, we still have a backup plan of the Oral Torah. Well, the Talmud says like this. Talmud says, this is a standard. I'm just picking of what the standards ought to be. Famous Gemara, famous Talmud in Kiddushin that says that we have to study Torah, that it should be so on our fingertips, we should never even have to hesitate. Any question? Anyone ask me all of Torah? You shouldn't say, I think it's... No, right away, give an answer. We should be as assured in our Torah as we are that our sister is our sister. The verse says in Proverbs, you should say to wisdom, you are my sister. We should be as closely connected to Torah as we are with the fact that this is my sister. You don't have to is she my sister? Let me check her ID. We don't do that, right? This is you. Additionally, the verse tells us, this is once again from the Talmud there, we should bind them onto our fingertips and write them on our hearts. That's what the relationship we're supposed to have with Torah. If we have that kind of relationship, or if we even fathom what that dedication relationship is like, the question really falls away. Of course the Oral Torah will be transmitted accurately. This is the mission of the Jewish people. We'll make sure it happens. Now, how successful were they? What do we know? Is there any kind of timestamp in history that we could stop and say, okay, let's look, 500-600 years after Moses, what was the nation like? So the Talmud gives us such a snapshot. This is in the middle, or towards the end of the first temple era. There was a righteous king of Judah. His name was Chistiyahu. And he took a sword, and he placed the sword at the entrance of the study hall. And he says, whoever's not studying will be stabbed. Can you imagine they made a law like that? Capital offense if you're negligent. If you take time off from Torah study, you get executed. Now, the question maybe can be asked, was this a little bit metaphorical? Was it some sort of proverbial sword or not? That's a good question. But either way, the idea is clear. To them, they viewed Oral Torah's transmission as an existential responsibility of the Jewish people that was so important that there was no room for mistakes. And every child and every man and every woman, everyone had to know all of Oral Torah. And indeed, they made a census. And they looked from Dan to Beersheba, from one end of Israel to the other end of Israel, and they did not find a single Amma Arts, a single non-Torah scholar. Not even one. They tried to find the guy. They couldn't find him. Additionally, they went from Givas and Antiphras, this is other ends of Israel, and they did not find not a young child, not a young female child, not a man, not a woman that was not bucky, that was not absolutely clear in the laws, the very complex laws of purity and impurity. Remember, in those times, the laws of purity and impurity were very relevant. If you were pure, you could go to the temple, you could eat certain holy foods. If you were impure, you had to avoid contact with other people. Those laws were very relevant. They could not find a single kid who didn't know those laws down to their last minute detail. So indeed, we have this snapshot in history that it works. And I think that last point leads us into our next point. We assume, erroneously, but we assume that the Oral Torah was transmitted as ideas. Ideas, ideals, lots and lots and lots of ideas. 63 books worth of ideas. That's a mistake. Oral Torah was the way of life of Jews. That's what it was. How do you know how to put on a shirt? Did you read it in some book? No, just when you were 2 or 3, your mom put your shirt on, and then eventually you learned how to do it yourself. Did you ever read how to cut your nails? I don't ever read in a book. How do we all know? How come there's uniformity across the world about how to cut your nails?
Observation.
No, it's just that you grew up with it. This is a way of life. Yeah,
Someone else did it.
but you also do it yourself.
Yeah, but maybe your mother taught you, maybe you watched your mother.
That's right. But it's not like someone said, okay, Howard, there's this idea of cutting nails. This is how you do it. It's all theoretical. It's not theoretical. The Torah is very practical. And every element of Torah was very practical. My children know that if there's a red light, you stop. If there's a green light, you go. And then if there's a yellow light, it depends. If mommy's driving, you slow down, right? And daddy's driving, you make sure you make it, right? My kids know that. They call me out if I miss it. If I say, I turned red on the way. How do they know? Did they read in some book? How do they know? Did anyone here read in a book? Did you ever have to have some sort of consultation with some official documentation from the state or from the county that says this is the official rules? No. This is the way of life. This is the way we've been living. Every day we do this countless times. Jewish law is not some sort of ancient, archaic, and arcane and esoteric ideals that are only practiced by some people at some times. This was the practice of the Jewish people throughout their lives. This is how they lived. And even today, if you ask my kids, they never read in this book, what do tefillin look like? Remember, this doesn't appear anywhere in the written Torah. We mentioned that already last week. What does it look like?
But it appears on your body and they see it.
They see it. You bring it to shul once, everyone's wearing tefillin, it's black boxes, different compartments. My kids sometimes they give it a kiss. The kiss my tzitzis, right? I have tzitzis. They know what tzitzis is. Well, where does it say what tzitzis is? It's not in the written Torah, it's in the Oral Torah. So Oral Torah is more about teaching. It's less about teaching. It's more about a behavior, a way of life of a nation for generations. And that doesn't need to be taught formally. Formally, it's a way of life. Like I said, it's observational. Kids in the time of Chistiyahu, right, they knew the laws of purity and impurity. Why? Did they read it in some book? No, it wasn't written in a book. Maybe it was written. The details and the fine details written in some notebook, right? But it wasn't a book that they read. Maybe they were taught. They were taught as kids, but also they observed. They saw their parents. If the parents went to a funeral, right, they behaved as someone who was a tamei mace, and therefore they didn't go to the temple. They needed certain sacrifices. They had to go through the purification process. They had to go get the red heifer. Like they behaved like that. This was common knowledge. Everyone did that. It's like kids learn how to ride a bike. That's what they do. Once they ride the bike, they ride their bike. They're good to go. So we have a little bit of this today. Kids who grew up in a Torah observant family, they know all the laws of Shabbat before they ever even go to yeshiva. How? Laws of Shabbat is so complex. How do they know it? Because they behave it. And from a very early age, the parents show them, and they see their parents, and Someone once asked Rabbi Jacob Kamenetsky, one of the great America, who's actually my namesake, my name Yaakov. Yaakov Kamenetsky is my great uncle of mine. So someone once asked him, how do you teach your kids to make blessings? Blessings, such a central part of Jewish life. You got to make 100 blessings every day. Well, how do you teach your kids to do blessings? She says, I don't know. I never taught my kids to do blessings. I just did blessings and they copied me. But that's the primary method of transmission of oral Torah was not done in the classroom. It was in the house. Every Jewish home from the very earliest age. Kids know, and even today, kids know that there's a Talmud. My 8-year-old son, anytime I'm with any students of mine or in a Shabbos meal, and someone says, oh, there's a Gemara in, Bechoros that says this, he's like, I'm going to go get it. He runs to my office, finds the Gemara, brings it to me. So he knows, he grows up with the knowledge. He can't read a page of Talmud yet, but he grows up with the knowledge that there is this collection of books called the Talmud, and he knows how to read the names of the Talmud, and your father is so excited when you bring it to him, and we open it, we read it, and it's wisdom from Moses at Sinai. That's oral Torah. Because oral Torah is not ideas, it's behavior. And if it's behavior, it's so much easier to remember it. We all know what the 4 species that we take on Sukkot is. It's not in the written Torah. Written Torah says you take a really nice fruit. What is that, a pomegranate? Is it a lemon? Is it a beautiful apple? Everyone knows it's an etrog. How do the kids know? Well, when they were 3 years old, and they went to preschool and nursery or whatever, the day before Sukkot, they all came home with an esrog, and had pictures of esrogs, and they saw their dad had an esrog, and dad said, don't touch it because you want to pull off the top. So they know you're supposed to pull off the top. Kids know all the laws. How do they know the laws? They didn't go to school. A Jewish life breeds knowledge of the oral Torah. You live a Jewish life, your kids will know the vast majority of oral Torah. We have a hard time because the more distant we are from a Jewish way of living, the more distant we are from the Torah that's involved with the Jewish way of living. And that's compounded in our world. We don't have a temple, we don't have sacrifices, we don't have the agricultural laws of Israel, and therefore it becomes so much harder. I had a question this year. Listen to this question. So, in Israel, in the 19th century, there was an innovation. And the innovation was called heter mechira. This solved a lot of problems and created even more problems. What problem did it solve? The problem it solved was that there's a law of Shemitah, and the Shemitah says you can't do work for every 7th year. And then people said, I'm not doing it, or people said, we'll starve. So they made a new innovation called heter mechira. Heter means a permission to sell. What they would do is they would sell fields to non-Jews, and a non-Jew is not obligated with the laws of Shemitah. So, workaround, right? Loophole. That's why we're the best accountants in the world. Right? The non-Jew is not obligated by the laws of Shemitah, so he'll be the official owner, and thus we could kind of operate the field, and we could have food, and he'll give us a kickback, and we'll make sure it works out, we'll buy it back after Shemitah. So that was developed in the late 19th century in Israel. When times got better, the rabbis and leaders of the community in Israel said, yeah, maybe at a time where things weren't as developed and the community wasn't as strong, that was an okay loophole to follow. But in modern times, where it's so much easier to either import produce from outside of Israel or to find other workarounds, we shouldn't rely on it. Fine, but some people still do. So today last year was Shemitah, and there are some fields, some lands, some farmers in Israel that still rely on this heter mechira. But the vast majority of Torah observant Jews would refrain from consuming any heter mechira produce. Fast forward to 2016 in Belden's. So Belden's is the local grocery store, and I'm shopping, and I go for Israeli sunflower seeds. And I've been buying Israeli sunflower seeds in Belden's for years. And I grab the bag, it's the same bag it's always been. I put it in my cart, I buy it, I go home, it's Shabbos, we're enjoying Shabbos with the family. I call my kids, get me the sunflower seeds. Get me sunflower seeds, we open up, we're all consuming, it's delicious and wonderful. And then I notice on the package it says big letters, Het Mechira. It's the same exact package, but on the bottom it says Het Mechira.
What does that mean again?
Het Mechira, which means that this produce was produce that was worked upon, the field was worked upon on Shemitah, but they sold it to a non-Jew, that's their workaround, and it's a loophole that people don't rely on anymore. So I have a bag full of sesame seeds, full of sunflower seeds. I'm halfway eating it. What do I do? This is a real Shemitah question.
Not to partake of any.
So the problem is you cannot consume it, but you cannot throw it out. You're really in a pickle. It's food that has the status of Shemitah, but you can't eat it. So you can't throw it out because it has the status of Shemitah. It's a complicated question. And if you ask an American rabbi, like I did, they'll say, Shemitah, I don't know, I'm dealing with all my other problems. I don't deal with Shemitah here. This is not Israel. In Israel, during the Shemitah year, it's Shemitah 24/7. Everywhere you go, there's crash courses on Shemitah. Every rabbi gets up to date on it. Every year there's new books and new courses, and right? That's the life there. In America, we're so distant, right? One time you have a Shemitah question, it comes up. But one of the reasons why, back to our central point here, one of the reasons why oral Torah is difficult for us in some areas is because we don't observe them. If we had the temple around, we would all know the various different kinds of sacrifices, all the different kinds of sacrifices, and what are the rules, and what are the exceptions. We don't know that because we don't operate like that. Temple's going to be rebuilt, God willing. And then the first thing, everyone's going to have a crash course. Right? We're all going to go to a webinar online, a crash course on the laws of a Passover sacrifice, because all of us are going to be flying to Israel. Right? What's the first thing you do, by the way, when Mashiach comes? You get the news. First thing you do, you book flights for Pesach in Israel. Because if you wait a second,
What did you say?
you book flights.
Oh, book it.
You book a flight to Pesach Israel. If you wait a second, the prices are going to skyrocket. Why? Because there's an obligation of every Jew who's able to go to Israel on Passover when the temple's rebuilt and be partake in the festivities and in the consumption of the Passover sacrifice. So first thing you do is book a flight. Next thing you do is find a webinar, because I'm telling you there's going to be YouTube channels dedicated towards all the various details of different sacrifices. That's what's going to happen. And suddenly will be so relevant to us. Suddenly our life will say, I got to get to know all these laws. And you know what? Very quickly, we'll pick up where we left off. Because that's the way it is. You adopt you have a new job, or you have a new, you have a new job, right? So the first time you get there, it's kind of how do you drive here? Where do you park, right? And then once you've been working there for a week, like you do it in your sleep, right? You know exactly where to park, you know exactly when to go, you know exactly, right? What are the shortcuts and workarounds? When we behave with Torah law, we know Torah law with all the details written and oral together. And the more we observe, the more we'll just learn by attrition, by just exposure to a Jewish way of life teaches us about a Jewish way of life, i.e., otherwise known as the Oral Torah. Thus, the question of how the Oral Torah was transmitted accurately for so long, for so many years, it really assumes that we're transmitting ideas. But if it's a Jewish way of life, well, then that seems much more palatable. But not only that, we have an accounting of 1,500 years from Moses till the Mishnah was written down, and then continuing on till the Talmud was written down, wherein we don't find any records of mistakes or misunderstandings in the Oral Torah. We do find a little bit. The beginning of machlokas, the beginning of disagreements, happens within a couple of hundred years of the writing of the Mishnah. In fact, one of the reasons why the Mishnah had to be written is because machlokas, disagreements, started to fall into the transmission of the Torah. So my question is, if, as we had assumed previously, if the Torah, the Oral Torah, left unattended, left unwritten, is likely to go awry, well, how come we don't have accountings of all these disagreements? Like Moses and Joshua and Samuel and David and Saul and Solomon. We don't have it. The first accountings of disagreements come much later. And the answer is that there's another element towards ensuring accuracy in perpetuation of oral Torah. We have, on top of just the methods of instructions, like we outlined previously, we also have safety measures to ensure that if mistakes do happen, they're quickly rectified. We nip them in the bud. So, for example, prophecy is existing within the Jewish people all the way up to the beginning of the Second Temple era. If you have any problem, any misunderstanding, two rabbis go different ways in opinion. You have an argument. What do? Well, you could go to the prophet. Prophet has a direct communication line with God. You could clarify any mistakes. So this actually shortens the amount of time that we're on our own, so to speak, all the way from 1,500 years to almost 500 years, which is much less. 500 years, well, what's that? It's only a couple generations, right? We have prophecy. We have also the Urim v'Tumim. Urim v'Tumim were the Kohen Gadol's breastplates that had some magical powers, wherein you were able to communicate with God via that certain letters would light up. Incredible. And that was in existence in the first temple, not in the second temple. So we have these offices, these institutions of Jewish leadership in the form of the high priesthood and of the prophecy that would mitigate a lot of the easy mistakes that potentially could fall for on our own. And there's more. The Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is a body of legal scholars and Torah leaders of the people that was established by Moses. If you take a look, we read it a couple of weeks ago in the Parsha, in Numbers chapter 11, verse 16, the Almighty tells Moses, "Gather for me 70 men, and these will be the elders of the people, and the Almighty says, I will bequeath some of my greatness, so to speak, to them, and they'll help with the leadership of the people." So Moses establishes a Sanhedrin. It's known as the Sanhedrin, 70 plus Moses, so that's 71. And that institution of Jewish leadership was in existence almost uninterrupted from the times of Moses, so from the 13th century before the Common Era, all the way until the middle of the 4th century of the Common Era. So we have almost interrupted. There were some exceptions, but almost uninterrupted 1,700 years, a body comprised of a minimum of 71. Indeed, during some parts it was 120, the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, which is the Sanhedrin under the leadership of Ezra. But even later on, there was 71 scholars, legal scholars, whose sole responsibility, not sole, but primary responsibility was to mediate disagreements in oral Torah transmission. Not only that, so it's 71 scholars plus a bench, a bullpen of 69 backup scholars. So it's essentially the 140 greatest scholars of the people were congregated in Jerusalem, which is by the temple, in the epicenter of Jewish life, and their primary goal was ensuring the continuity of the oral Torah. And in fact, we're told in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 17, very long, very famous verse, when you have a disagreement, there's a wonderment. Two rabbis, one guy says this, one guy says that. Disagreement between two laws, between two bloods, very complex laws of which blood becomes pure, which becomes impure, between various negas, which is skin illnesses. You have disagreements. You get up and you go to Jerusalem and you come to the priests, to the Levites, to the judges that are around in that time, and you present the question before the Supreme Court. That's what it is, the Supreme Court of the Jewish people. And you have to follow what they tell you, and you have to guard what they tell you, and the Torah that they instruct you have to do, you should not deviate from what they tell you, not right and not left. The Talmud tells us, what does that mean? If they tell you right is left and left is right, you have to listen to them. So we have this kind of this end point, this final say in mediating disagreements in Torah is the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin was ever present in Jerusalem. Later on it moved. After the temple was destroyed, it went to Yavne, it went to various other places. But it was in existence for 1,700 years with almost no gaps. And they were the last stop that you had. And if there was a disagreement, yeah, maybe there was. You went to them and they clarified it. That was the bastion of Torah. That was the wellsprings of Torah that taught Torah to everyone. And in fact, the role that they played in ensuring continuity of Jewish law was so critical that the Torah tells us that if you have a judge, so two judges from some town to have a disagreement, they go to the temple to follow the law, and they present their arguments in front of the court, and the court votes in a way that is a final vote, that one of them is right, the other one they made a mistake, and they go back to their towns. And that judge, who was disproven by the Sanhedrin, he continues to preach his mistake. He doesn't accept the authority and the ruling of the Sanhedrin. That is a capital offense. That's called a zaken mamre, which means a rebellious elder. And in fact, this is such a strict law that, well, he's teaching something, right? Well, what does it matter? He's still teaching Torah, right? No, because he is threatening the very foundations of our religion. If we start splintering, if you have two religions, where some people are operating one way, other people are operating the other way, what happens to our mission, our destiny? What happens to our nation? And in fact, just to impress this point, the zaken mamre, the rebellious elder, is not executed right away. In Jewish law, in Jewish capital crimes, the halacha is that they have to be executed right away. We don't let people languish on death row for decades. But this is an exception. They wait until the aforementioned holiday, and all the people converge. We all fly in on Passover to Israel, and that's when they execute him. Do you know why? Because everyone has to know that if you question the authority of the Sanhedrin, you're undermining the institution that is ensuring the continuity of the Jewish people. And everyone has to know that, because you're right. Some mistakes disagreements can happen, mistakes can happen, there could be gaps, certainly localized gaps in the transmission of the Oral Torah. But if we let that fester, if we let that go out of control, we're done as a nation. And the Sanhedrin is the safety measure to ensure that won't happen. Finally, what happens if a mistake indeed does happen? Let's say the Sanhedrin got it wrong. Now, there's no way for us to know that this ever happened. But let's assume it did. Let's assume the Almighty came and told us in a prophecy that there was a disagreement. We went to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin ruled one way, and they were wrong. What happens then? So I want to talk about this a little bit more in a future class. But the truth is, nothing happens. Do you know why? Because the Almighty gave us a pure, unadulterated Torah. Our mission and our responsibility, the people, the nation, is to perpetuate it as best as we can, as accurately as we can. We have to be committed 100% to ensuring that happens. But we're not angels. The Torah wasn't given to angels. The Torah was given to us. We're told in the book of Deuteronomy, the Torah is not in the heavens. It's here. This is it. The Torah is ours. It was God's Torah, now it's our Torah. In fact, when you study Torah, you're taking God's Torah and integrating it into your mind. It becomes your Torah. We pray, give us our Torah. Well, it's God's Torah, right? Yeah, it starts off as God's Torah, but it becomes ours. And indeed, this may sound a little radical, but we'll talk about this hopefully in the future. Let's say we know for sure what God thought. Somehow we knew miraculously what God thought. But following the rules of the Sanhedrin, we vote in the opposite way. We overrule God. The responsibility of ensuring the continuity of the Torah is ours. The responsibility and the right. This is the mission of the Jewish people can be simplified as to continue the transmission of the Torah as accurately as we can, but with following all the responsibilities, the demand that we study Torah incessantly and unrelentingly, the assurances of the Sanhedrin, the making sure it's a way of life. A mistake happens, well, the Talmud goes as far as to say that the Almighty is bound by the court of humans. Because that's the way it works. The way it works is that if we do our job and we do it to the best of our ability, even if there is a mistake, that becomes Torah. It's a little bit of a radical idea. We'll try to develop it in a future lecture. But either way, back to our central point, or central question, point of contention. Is it a problem to ask, how is the Torah transmitted accurately, the oral Torah transmitted accurately without any mistakes for 1,500 years? It's a good question. But it's important to not have a simplistic slant to that question. To assume that silly mistakes in transmission, like the form of a broken telephone, will happen in the transmission of the oral Torah, that's a mistake. That's an incorrect question to ask. Why? Because the game is to try to make mistakes, and the goal of Torah is to ensure that no mistakes happen. So that's number one. But number two, it's not just transmitting ideals; it's transmitting way of life. Not only that, it's a culture of study that we have had. We continue to have to a large extent. There's more people studying Torah worldwide than any other advanced form of scholarship. Even to this day, Torah people. How many people view Torah as being the most important thing in the world? It's a minute fraction of the world. Yet there are more people studying Torah in the form of absolute scholarship than anything else in the world. Till this day, as 0.00 whatever it is percentage of the world. I think 0.02%. It's a tiny fraction, infinitesimally insignificant, or at least that's the way we ought to be, of the world. Yet, our national pastime, our commitment to Torah, our culture of learning is vibrant till this day. But that was amplified 1,000-fold when the Torah was only oral. It was amplified in ways we can imagine. Every kid knew everything because that was their life. Kids today, they know the sport that it used to be, certainly, in the 60s and 70s. Every kid knew how many RBIs Mickey Mantle had, right? How do they all know? How do they memorize all these statistics? Well, if that's their life, they'll know it. Kids today, they know celebrities, right? How do they know so many celebrities? How do they keep track of all this nonsense, this Pokemon stuff? How do they do it? Well, the human mind is a remarkable thing. If you are committed, if you give me the 14 years of 12 hours of study, even you can memorize all of Oral Torah. It's not so hard. All you need is commitment. Our question is from a place of, if we're assuming that the Jewish people were as uncommitted to Torah then as they are now, that's a good question. But we have to realize historically the Jewish people were committed. We are committed today still, but in 1,000 times more committed we were when the Torah was only oral. With that culture of learning, it's no miracle that the oral Torah was transmitted without mistakes. We do find some disagreements, minor disagreements. We'll talk about why disagreements happen. That's a future class that I have scheduled. How disagreements fall and how do we deal with disagreements and how do we navigate out of the problems that arise from disagreements. Those are all important questions. But for the vast majority of the time, there's no disagreements. And that is not some sort of leap of faith that we're making. It's just following the rules of how it's adjudicated, number one, but also of how it's studied and how it's imparted and how it was imparted and how 4 was the minimum, but even 100 times, even 400 times, even 800 times, whatever it is, this is so important. Make sure you get it right. Indeed, we could safely say that the Torah that we got from Moses was the same Torah that was transmitted to Joshua and to King David and to Ezra and to the Zudot and to Hillel and to Rabbi Akiva and to Rabbi Judah the Prince, and written in the Mishnah, a monumental effort, 1,000 rabbis over multiple decades, writing down the formalized, finalized Mishnah, codifying it into 3 books. And then 300 years later, the writing down of the Talmud. And then we have the great leaders who wrote down the halacha for us. And indeed, we could safely say, as one of the 13 principles of faith, the Torah that we have today is the same Torah that the Almighty gave Moses at Mount Sinai. Next time, we will delve into the canonization of the Oral Torah. What changed historically that compelled the writing down, the finalized writing down of the Oral Torah, and the various different stages? Why the Mishnah is written down, the Talmud is written down, Halacha continually needs to be written down, but the various stages where it was written down over history. And then we'll get into the question of, back to the Sanhedrin, how it worked, what's the role of the rabbis, how did that change over time, to what extent, what are the responsibilities, requirements, and what are the limitations of rabbinic authority, and what happens, of course, when something goes wrong and there's a disagreement. I thank you all. It was lots of fun as usual. Yes, Howard.
Could you give us an example of a minor disagreement?
Yeah, sure. So, minor disagreement.
If you can't think of it.
No, it's fine. 3 walls or 2 walls. Sorry, 4 walls or 3 walls on a sukkah. Everyone today makes 4 walls sukkahs anyhow. How long does it have to be? You know, how high does it have to be? How low does it have to be? This is a better example. A man dies with leaving no children and 2 wives and 1 brother. One of the wives is the daughter of the existing brother. Is that existing brother allowed to marry the other wife? Did this happen in history once? Maybe. It's not like an everyday habit. It's not like people say, oh, I think pig is allowed and you think pig is not allowed. We have no disagreements. In any core law, there's no disagreements. It's in these minute details that are so uncommon, that almost never happened. People never got to experience it. Like that question, like levirate marriage in the case where there's 2 women, one of them is related to the existing brother, what happens then? That's a disagreement. Very minor, right? But that the Talmud spends a lot of pages talking about it. Okay, lots of fun, everyone. I look forward to seeing you all next week, and thank you all. Thank you. Lots of fun. I appreciate it as well.
Vacations.